Good afternoon and welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the breakout sessions, the lunch and the networking time. I really enjoyed actually getting to meet more of you and hearing kind of stories from different trusts around the country. So thank you for coming to chat to me. Our next guest this afternoon is NHS England Chief Executive Amanda Pritchard. It's an increasingly challenging time for the NHS, as we've been discussing over the last day and a half. And Amanda is going to discuss the challenges and the opportunities facing the sector as we head into this winter period. This session is going to be live streamed, and we have Glisser, the online thing, working again. So you can submit Q&A via that if you prefer. It's quite nice for me to be able to see your comments and feed them in. Submit questions by going to the Glisser login page, scan the QR code and input your delegate email address. And you can put key issues and questions for your trust on the table for discussion. And find the session which you require in the On Now section. And then you click the plus on the bottom right of your screen and type your question. But I'm delighted to welcome Amanda Pritchard to the stage now.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Samira. I see I have clearly drawn the ace immediately after lunch slot. So as I was coming in, I was listening to the music thinking, yeah, we're going to struggle with staying awake, aren't we, for the next few minutes? But I will do my best to make it worth your while being here for the next few minutes. So let me start, if I may, actually, by thanking all of you for coming today and continuing to be part of what I know has been a really great set of conversations over the past couple of days. And also, let me start by thanking NHS Providers, not only for putting on this event, but also for timing their conference so brilliantly so that it's both immediately close to a major fiscal event and also timing it, of course, to allow us to congratulate Julian Hartley on his appointment as the next Chief Executive of NHS Providers. I know that Julian will be a strong voice for all of you, and importantly for your staff and your patients too, not least because, of course, he already is in his current post. And I also just want to pay tribute to Saffron, who has stepped up to lead NHS Providers over the last few months brilliantly, and of course has also provided enormously valued, wise counsel as Deputy Chief Executive for the last few years. And finally, let me assure you that we are looking after Chris very well since he came to join us. You may have seen him back on your screens last week, both doing some social media and also some stuff on TV, and he promises me there will be more to come. But we have, I should say, for anyone who saw him over the pandemic, we have drawn the line at installing a mantelpiece behind him in Wellington House. So I should also just add my congratulations now to those I'm sure lots of you have been sending to Sarah Jane Marsh and to Tim Briggs following the Secretary of State's announcement this morning. Two really crucial, challenging jobs and two key priorities for patients and the public and, of course, for all of us here, and two very capable and experienced leaders who know what it takes to support systems and organisations to improve. Because whilst this has been a year in which a lot of parliamentary time has been taken on the establishment of integrated care structures, and there's been a strong focus, of course, as part of that on the value of partnership and the importance of working in an integrated way, we have never lost sight of the fact that it is providers who are at the real sharp end of the NHS. Acute providers, mental health providers, community providers, ambulance services, specialist service providers, and of course primary care, as well as our partners in social care and in the voluntary sector. To borrow the title from your NHS Providers' excellent series of case studies, it is providers who deliver for patients. Since I addressed your conference last year, it's been a time of huge uncertainty and huge challenge. I made headlines earlier this month when I said that in many ways the job ahead of us is more complex, more difficult than the one we went through in those first 2 years of the pandemic. But those of you with good memories will know that was actually a prediction I made at this conference this time last year, and I think it has definitely proved to be the case, both for reasons we expected and for reasons we couldn't have foreseen. Omicron arrived with us shortly after I made those remarks last year, and it was another national mission which saw the whole NHS step up once again to increase capacity, to build safety and resilience into cancer, elective and other non-COVID services, which among other things saw the number of first cancer treatments actually exceeding pre-pandemic levels for the January 2022 peak, and crucially turbocharged, of course, that vaccine booster campaign, which saw nearly 13 million adults take up the offer of a booster vaccination in December alone. The NHS, the whole NHS, once again stepping up for our patients, once again repaying the trust put in us by the public, and once again providing the foundation on which society and the wider economy can build. Collectively, we need to do that again this winter, because the warnings around the impact of COVID, flu and other respiratory viruses are not idle ones. Just this week, we've seen hospitals in Southern California erecting tents outside hospitals to cope with the rising cases. We can't simply hope we don't get to that stage. We have to plan and we have to act. Vaccines, obviously, absolutely crucial, but they won't be enough on their own. And I know you are already hard at work, and you have been for some time, putting in place extraordinary measures to ensure our patients get the best possible service this winter. Those interventions that we shared with you back when we wrote out in August, and again more recently, we shared them because, importantly, because of what you have told us, because of what we've seen for ourselves, we know they can work because they are what already many of you are doing. So we asked you to work together on community-based falls services because of examples like Hull First, where ambulances, acute and community NHS teams are working together with fire services, councils and others to provide a rapid pickup service for people who haven't suffered injury, reducing A&E attendances, freeing up ambulance crews for those who need them, and most importantly, providing a better experience for our patients. We've asked you to maximise the use of virtual wards because of exemplars like Norfolk and Norwich, where their virtual model has already saved 12,000 bed days with a patient satisfaction rating of 98%. We've asked you to work with primary care colleagues to provide acute respiratory hubs because of examples like Sandwell, where more than 8,000 families have been given a same-day alternative to A&E, and it's been so effective that 3 further hubs are now opening in the Black Country. We've asked you as systems to undertake additional work with those care homes from which we see the most 999 calls and the most hospital admissions because of great collaborative examples like the One Western Care Home Hub, bringing together primary and community services and substantially reducing emergency admissions and length of stay for those care homes that are covered. We've asked mental health and ambulance services to work together to provide 24/7 capability in the ops rooms and on the roads because of successes like Yorkshire and the North West ambulance services have already had, working with their local mental health trusts, as well as other partners like the police, getting more appropriate trained support quickly to people experiencing mental health crisis. And we've asked you to initiate 24/7 system control centres to help coordinate all that support and more, precisely because of the strong success of systems like Kent and Medway, pulling together real-time data to allow for the best possible joint decisions for patients across the patch. These are proven solutions which put patients first. developed and driven by you, by clinicians and by your partners, and now ready to be adapted and adopted for local use in a way that's going to make most sense where you are. It is vital that we ensure as many patients as possible benefit from those initiatives this winter. But as well as urgent and emergency care, look, we all know, don't we, we need to maintain progress on elective and cancer care too. Just as we have throughout the pandemic and before, putting the needs of patients first means empowering our clinicians to arrange the right care at the right time. When I was here in the summit, in fact, not exactly here, but I think in the other building, just over the way, for Confed Expo in June, I announced a new trial then for community pharmacists to directly refer their customers with suspected cancer symptoms for tests. Part of how we are increasingly moving the NHS, out of hospitals, onto high streets, into the heart of people's communities, and making care as convenient as possible. Because community pharmacies aren't just a place to pick up paracetamol and plasters. They can now write prescriptions. They can help spot major killers like high blood pressure and cancer. They are successfully keeping thousands of elderly patients out of hospital each month. Almost 160,000 patients were seen by pharmacists after leaving hospital for advice on their medication over a 6-month period, preventing up to 16,000 admissions. At the same time, patients no longer have to visit a hospital to get key health checks. The NHS has rolled out dozens of diagnostic services in supermarkets, in car parks, delivering over 2 million important tests, such as X-rays and MRIs, since last year. And today, I'm delighted to be able to announce the next step, giving family doctors the ability to book patients with concerning but not specific urgent cancer symptoms directly into CT scans, ultrasounds, or brain MRIs. GPs are already referring record numbers of patients for urgent cancer checks. So much so that the shortfall in people coming forward for cancer checks caused by the pandemic has now been eradicated. That is a real achievement, but this new national initiative builds on that and on the great work that's already gone on in pockets across the country, supporting GPs to provide more opportunities for testing across the country where people who have vague but worrying symptoms present. By sending patients straight to test, we can catch and treat more cancers at an earlier stage, helping us deliver on our long-term plan ambitions to diagnose 3/4 of cancers at stages 1 or 2, when of course they are so much easier to treat. And let's address the elephant in the room. We'll get some welcome clarity tomorrow on our financial outlook for the next couple of years. We know inflation affects NHS spending power just like it affects all public services, businesses, and households. And none of us, I think, would envy the task of the government as they seek to square that circle. But as it has always been, whatever the decisions announced tomorrow, it is our job and the job of our colleagues to ensure as much of that funding, as much of the funding entrusted to us is directed to where it can deliver the biggest impact for our patients. This is core to our mission. We are the NHS, and putting patients first is what we do. So it's why our admin costs already account for less than 2 pence in every pound, which is way below comparable countries. It's why we outpaced the wider economy on productivity over the last 10 years before the pandemic, an enduring respect for the tax-paying public who continue to overwhelmingly support us, an enduring drive to deliver the very best evidence-based, clinically led care that we can. It's why nationally we are already working to realise the significant savings that can be made through the creation of the new NHS England, reducing our combined size by up to 40% so that we can pass through more funding to systems, as well as providing more streamlined support to you and your colleagues. It's why we're also clear that many ICBs will need to look at their size too as they work through their plans for the coming years, as well as take opportunities that economies of scale bring. And whilst I know that the provider sector is already very lean, we will all need to be realistic that prioritising patient care will in many cases need a hard-nosed assessment of what else can be scaled back or done effectively but more cheaply through collaboration with neighbours. Doing this is important, yes, as a symbol of that commitment expected of us by the public to use our money wisely, but also as a contribution, however marginal, to getting more funding to the front line, supporting more clinicians to deliver more patient care, and creating the headroom that we need to invest to transform and to improve services for the future. But we also have to acknowledge that we have tens of thousands of clinical roles budgeted for that we can't substantively fill right now. Despite the record number of people working in hospitals and community health services, and that includes a record number of doctors, an incredible number of people choosing health qualifications and careers, it's also true that the level of vacancies we are carrying, combined with the ongoing limits on productivity due to the pandemic, means services are stretched now, and having the right number of people with the right skills in the right jobs remains a key question mark over future plans. To continue to put patients first, we have to put our workforce right up there too. You all know, I hope, that we are well underway with the development of a long-term workforce plan, and we'll be delivering that to government soon. But we know our job is far from over once the plan is released. To maintain credibility and usefulness, it's clear we're going to need to update it regularly, similar to how the OBR adjusts its economic forecasts to take account of the latest data, so ensuring that there's always the clearest possible view of our future workforce needs. This approach will help give us up-to-date projections on the number of doctors, nurses, therapists, paramedics needed, but also wider experts like data scientists and other roles that we would all recognise as being crucial to supporting patients and clinicians. And by matching those projections with action to recruit and train the right number of the right staff, that will help us reduce our over-reliance on agency staff and bring down our annual agency bill. Knowing what we need in the here and now is relatively easy, but it is impossible to accurately predict, exactly where we'll be in 15 years. How advances in science and technology, diagnostics, therapeutics, AI, the Internet of Things will open up new frontiers and new opportunities to improve health and care, and the mix of skills and experience that we will need to take advantage of them. The story of the NHS is one of a simple idea, but also one of constant evolution and advancement in pursuit of it. When I joined the NHS 25 years ago, and when I took my first board level position 15 years ago, I couldn't have imagined some of the incredible things the NHS is able to do today. Putting health records and services in the palms of people's hands through the NHS app, making it as simple to order prescriptions as to order pizza, or booking vaccines and hospital appointments as easily as you could book a taxi, having the ability and a credible plan to eliminate Hep C and HIV as public health concerns, things that we wouldn't have dared think were possible in the 90s. Delivering chemotherapy and other medical supplies by remote-controlled drones or electric-powered bikes, the stuff of tomorrow's world. But we are doing that right now. So I know that we have great things in our future too, provided that we have the staff we need to turn invention and innovation into real improvements. The next time we meet, the NHS will have celebrated its 75th anniversary, a time to celebrate our past, certainly, but more importantly, a time to think about that future. A future where we continue to put patients first. A few weeks ago, on a visit to Addenbrooke's, I had a special chance to encounter part of that future. In fact, I didn't just encounter the future, I met the future. I held the future, and I gently bounced the future on my knee as I had a cup of tea with the future's grandma and mother, and I know what many of you are thinking. You're thinking, that's not a very kind thing to say about Roland Sinker. But whilst I'm not taking away his claim to embody the future, in this case, I am talking about a beautiful, happy baby boy called Oliver Bell. A few days before Oliver was due to arrive, his parents, Sarah and Michael, received some concerning news. An ultrasound showed a large tumour on Oliver's right leg, around 6 centimetres in length. When he was born, standard blood tests were taken to try and determine the cause. And within 2 days of what should have been one of the most amazing times for a new family, Sarah and Michael were faced with having to take Oliver to see the paediatric oncology team. Initial investigations suggested infantile fibrosarcoma. Survival rates are good, but surgery and chemotherapy is a lot for a young body to take, and patients need to be monitored for months and years afterwards. And while Sarah told me that she really appreciated the honesty of Oliver's doctors and nurses at that point while investigations were ongoing, and she had absolute faith that they would do their very best for her son, whatever the eventual diagnosis, I'm sure I don't need to tell anybody here just how scary a time that was for Sarah, for Michael, and for the whole extended family. Now, thankfully, as you've probably guessed, this story has a happy ending, because Oliver's consultant, Dr. Sam Bajati, is not just a paediatric oncologist, he's also a group leader at the Wellcome Sanger Institute. So when standard tests were inconclusive, he briefed Oliver's family on another type of test he had at his disposal, whole genome sequencing. Oliver's parents didn't need to have a full understanding of the mechanics and the clinical applications of genomics, or of the several painstaking days spent by the Cambridge team at the NHS East Genomic Laboratory Hub, who looked at the sequence data from Oliver's sample. But what they did know, and what mattered, was that within a few days of Oliver's care team taking another test, in Dr. Bajati's words, the mystery was solved. Oliver didn't have cancer or any other life-threatening condition. He had a myofibroma, which is a benign tumour now shrinking on its own. So instead of spending those first few weeks of Oliver's life coming backwards and forwards to hospital for chemotherapy, he and his family were able to do all the normal things that families do in those first few months, including, no doubt, not sleep. It's impossible to express just how much that means to Sarah and to Michael, or how proud I was listening to their story to be part of the NHS. Because while baby Oliver is, of course, unique in so many ways, he is just one of thousands of children, adults, and family members who have already benefited from whole genome sequencing since we launched the new service, and one of many more thousands who will benefit over the months and years ahead as we continue to roll out our world-leading genomics offer. And of course, the service stands on the shoulders of global scientific endeavour, but it's because we're the NHS that we are leading the world in making this technology available equitably, free at the point of access to more and more patients that we know will benefit clinically. As in so many other areas, putting patients first is not just a figure of speech or a way of doing things. By working with the best and the brightest partners in life sciences, in the charitable sector, and of course in our own service, we are literally putting patients first in line internationally for the latest and the best care options available. Genomics is only one example. There are many more, like the NHS Gallery trial. That's a new blood test to detect multiple different types of cancer early. We now have 140,000 people having signed up, like rolling out game-changing treatments for things like Hep C and HIV, like I mentioned a moment ago, like securing 5 first in Europe or first in the world deals for specialist drugs in just over a year. And that includes 2 drugs for lung cancer and a world-first subscription deal to tackle antimicrobial resistance. For every 4 treatments, on average, available in Europe, there is an additional medicine available in England. And clinicians here are able to access around a quarter more orphan medicines and close to a third more cancer drugs. And that's not because we've got the biggest checkbook or lower standards of regulation, far from it. That's because of a contribution of the attributes of the NHS, the equity of access we provide for patients, the expertise and the skill of our clinical and research workforce to develop and implement new technology, and because of the value that we are able to get from national coordination and negotiation. And I said it last year, as hard as the pandemic has been, as hard as the recovery still is, it has accelerated the rate of positive change too. They say, don't they, necessity is the mother of invention, and that's definitely partly true, but in the NHS, more often than not, it's providers who are the mother of invention, and particularly it's your clinical leaders from ward to board from where real innovation flows. As the NHS, we've always had to work hard on the problems of today to earn the right to get creative on the solutions of tomorrow, and that's not going to change, and nor should it. Our patients and our communities have every right to hold us to account for delivery on core business, which is being there when they need us. So yes, as the Secretary of State said this morning, we need an unrelenting focus on those things, on urgent and emergency care, reducing Category 2 response times and ambulance handover delays, reducing crowding and long waits in A&E, working as a system, using those control centres and the additional £500 million announced this morning for social care to get discharge and flow right. On elective and cancer waits, eliminating waits of over 78 weeks for elective care, getting back to pre-pandemic performance on the cancer 62-day target, supported by faster scans and tests, as I've discussed today. And of course, it's improving access to primary care. It's maximising the opportunities in community and out of hospital care, like the urgent community response teams and falls teams. And it's continuing to build capacity to support mental health needs as much as physical health needs. But at the same time, my message to you is that you have the power, you have the permission to continue to drive innovation, to forge partnerships, and to lead the reforms that will create the NHS of the future. It's what we are all here to do. So let's get on with it, and let's show the public once more just what the NHS is capable of.
Amanda, thank you so much. Do come and join me. We've got a little bit of time to take questions. And I would say if the tablet is around, I can look at the Glisser comments that have come in. You mentioned that example of thinking about California where they're setting up tents. And while there's so much that's very positive in your speech, I do wonder if you could expand a little on how well prepared you think our systems are for the coming winter, given all the challenges that you have outlined.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think nobody's trying to pull their punches on the level of pressure in the NHS at the moment, or indeed, as I've just said, some of the risks that we know COVID, flu, respiratory conditions bring. But I think that is why we have also collectively, and my colleagues tell me about this every day, put so much effort into planning early. So the additional 7,000 beds that funding was announced for, or bed equivalents, I should say, because it's a mixture of both, that was announced in the summer, the additional recruitment for 111 and 999 call handlers, some of the things I've just talked about, the rollout of the virtual wards, the rollout of respiratory hubs, system coordination centres, the falls response services. These are all the things that I think collectively put the NHS in the best possible place to be able to care for patients the way that we would all like to over this winter. I do think that the announcement this morning that Secretary of State made about the 500 million for social care is another crucial part of that jigsaw. I mean, we know, don't we, that at the moment, sort of 2 in 5 patients aren't able to leave hospital when they're clinically ready to move on. And a big part of that is the pressure on social care. So I think working together with partners in systems and locally is going to be another incredibly important part of what we need to do to make sure that we're as ready as we possibly can be.
Yeah. One of the things you talked about very carefully was you mentioned that prioritising patient care will require the provider sector to make and these are your words, a hard-nosed assessment of spending. And I wonder what else you think the service can feasibly scale back, given the increasingly tight finances we all know about.
So I think the story of the NHS has always been, as I said in my speech, a story about continued efficiency and that drive to make sure that every pound spent is spent well, and every pound that can go to frontline clinical services to give patients the benefits of that flow through investment is what we would all say that we have tried to do and continue to try and do every day. So at the moment there is a commitment that the NHS has made to identify £12 billion of savings across the 3 years, of which this is year one, and we are on track to deliver 5.6 billion this year, and that's right. I've talked back in the summer, for anyone who heard me, about the sort of 4 R's that were my kind of guiding principles for where we were, and the fourth of those, respect for our workforce, respect for our patients, but crucially also respect for the tax-paying public, who of course continue to support the NHS so strongly.
Yeah, lots of comments coming in, and we'll come to the auditorium in just a second. There's 2 that have come in about mental health. Could you say more about NHSE commitment to mental health and LDA, forgive me, what's learning disabilities
and
autism, specifically addressing care backlogs, continuing to address inequalities and reducing significant gap in life expectancy. And this person feels that those issues are both disappointingly absent in the Secretary of State's address and yours.
Oh, right. Well, I did talk about mental health because, as you'd expect me to say, the commitment to particularly those improvements set out in the long-term plan around mental health and learning disability and autism remain absolutely at the core of what NHS England is focused on. I think you may have had Claire Murdoch here yesterday, actually, who is the National Director for those services, talking about the work that she's leading. I think she would point, if she were here, to some of the statistics about how many more people are accessing care, but also she would say that's a system that we all recognise is also under enormous pressure, and that's true as much for mental health as it is for acute services. So I think for us, it's celebrate the good stuff, that we're way ahead of schedule on things like the mental health support teams in schools. That's great. We know the demand for children and young people's support has been particularly impacted by the pandemic, as in demand has gone significantly up as a consequence of the pandemic, and therefore those sorts of initiatives feel they were important before, they feel even more important now. But certainly the rest of that package of things that Claire is leading linked to the long-term plan remain, they remain absolutely at the core of what certainly NHS England is focusing on, and I feel confident that the audience here would support that.
2 other really good questions that have come in on Glyssa. As a previous CEO, could you tell us the vision for ICB? They appear to be becoming a regulator and not a partner, and how this affects the statutory responsibility of provider boards and executives.
Yeah, so ICBs, I'm sure no one in this audience would feel this, but sometimes we are criticised for putting out too much guidance, and I have to say ICBs have been blessed with a lot of guidance over the course of the past year. But one of the things that I think is really clear is it's the 4 purposes of ICBs, and we're really asking them, for anybody who has read the NHS operating framework. I made the mistake of asking this question at a conference recently, and 3 people put their hands up, so that's slightly disappointing. Do read it if you get a chance. It is worth looking at, because I think it tries to set out quite practically, if you like, what all that guidance, which has been quite technical in nature, means in practice, and what it means for systems working together, for providers, for NHS England and for ICBs. And it talks about two things in relation to ICBs. It talks about a clear responsibility for partnership, and that's both partnership, of course, part of the ICP, so it's that wider partnership, particularly with local government, though not only local government, in determining what the right strategic plan for the population over that sort of 5-year period is. So that is a collective partnership effort, but it is also a clear responsibility then for delivery. And part of that will be about what the ICB can distinctly do, and part of that is about the ICB, of course, holding the partners to account for their contribution to delivery of that plan. And that plan is, as we've discussed before, we discussed in my speech, it's the here and now and it's the future, because that's the reality we all live with, is it's the both and. So we have responsibilities for our patients today, things we need to do absolutely for this winter, but the way that we will ensure that the NHS continues to innovate, continues to meet the needs of our patients and populations, is going to be to make sure that we also keep that clear eye on the medium to long term, and that we are planning and delivering services for the future as well.
Thank you so much. Nice specific question here. Unlike national pay rates, the BMA are now encouraging no doctors to work below new, significantly higher rates. By holding the line, most trusts' elective recovery plans are in jeopardy. Will NHSE negotiate with the BMA to try and agree a compromise so that we can agree a standard?
Yeah, I mean, rates of pay, you're absolutely right, for particularly, I think this relates to overtime, to additional sessions, sort of the equivalent of, as colleagues will know, the way that rates of pay work for kind of bank and agency staff have always been dealt with locally. I mean, I think the important thing for us on the elective recovery plan is actually we're doing really well, so thank you. So having virtually eliminated 2-year waiters this summer, we've actually seen the number of 78-week waiters decrease by 60%, and currently on track for the next milestone, which is obviously April of next year. I think continuing to make sure that that access to elective care is protected over winter did really well, and again, thank you for that last winter despite Omicron. And I know that colleagues are planning and have been planning very carefully to make sure that we can continue to offer people who are waiting a long time for elective care, as well as those who need urgent access, particularly we think about cancer patients in that, the care they need over this winter period as well.
Thank you. Lots of interest in anti-racism policy. We had a whole panel discussion about it a bit earlier. So several questions, but I think the one that sums it up is it was refreshing to hear Saffron earlier today announcing that NHS providers will become anti-racist. Certainly they unveiled their new policy. Would you commit NHS England to the same, and your thoughts about embedding that there's some concern that targets on tackling inequalities in staffing in terms of discrimination might fall by the wayside given some of the other priorities?
Okay, there's a lot in that. So I think just to sort of take it in 3 parts, for NHS England as an organisation, I think colleagues will perhaps remember that my predecessor Simon Stevens set a very clear ambition around ensuring that at our senior staffing levels we were increasing the number of colleagues who came from ethnic minorities, and we are on track with that target. We continue to see significant progress. That is still core to our ambitions as we come together as an NHS England new organisation merging with HEE and NHS Digital. Obviously, some of the numbers need to be reset to reflect the wider organisational baselines from HEE and for NHSD. But the core commitment to equality and diversity as part of that process hasn't changed at all. Second point I think you made was a sort of broader one around equality and diversity. Where does that sit in the NHS? So look, we know, don't we, that our patients are really benefit from the diversity of our staff. And we saw that incredibly clearly in the COVID vaccination programme. So the ability of the NHS working in partnership, particularly with local voluntary sector, local government, to serve those communities that perhaps have been traditionally less well served by the NHS, and to ensure that everybody who could be touched by the vaccination programme was, and was as effectively as possible, was, I think, a real lesson to all of us that this needs to be not just words. So my colleagues and the workforce team led by Navina Evans are just at this point in time beginning the work to refresh the equality and diversity strategy for the NHS, and that's an important piece of work that will just take place over the next few months. And then finally, I think it's a broader question you asked about inequalities. So the way that we have approached, if I take elective recovery as a good example of elective recovery, has been to embed a focus on inequalities right from the start, and in the way that we monitor progress as well as the way that we scrutinise our national data, the way hopefully you're looking at your data locally as well. Because I think we've got, again, some really good examples from places who have looked at the differential waiting times, differential outcomes, and really sought to understand what's behind that and made changes in the way that they work as a consequence. I know we often talk about Calderdale's work, Calderdale and Huddersfield, on looking at people with learning disabilities and making sure that they were given particular focus in the way that they access services. I think it's just a really good local example of when you really understand your data, you get underneath it, and you can then take local action to make sure that the right people are getting care at the right time.
Thank you. If we can raise lights a bit, if you try and fit in a question or two from the floor, I've got another brilliant one I want to ask in the meantime. If the people with the microphones can wave. Number 2, just before you ask it, can I just put in one more that's come in, which is, Amanda, the NHS has been starved of capital investment. Will you call out the impact of poor capital investment on staff and patients?
I mean, so the need for us to make sure, obviously in partnership with government, that we have got investment in the running costs and in the capital is it's absolutely right, isn't it? It's about, again, as ever, I'm at risk of saying it's a both and, but it is a both and. I mean, I think we've been really clear, haven't we, and reflected in the long-term plan and reflected in the current programme of work that many colleagues I know are involved in, that's not just about buildings. So we've got the new hospital programme, which is a government programme, government-led programme, but clearly has a line of sight to doing some really ambitious things over the coming years, but also it's about digital. So our ability to make sure that that investment in the digital infrastructure and digital underpinnings continues to flow is also really important. So more EPRs going in now, I think, than we've had certainly for some years. And whilst I do appreciate that that can be very hard work in the short term, I think the evidence base is really clear about the benefit that that brings, both to our ability to run services efficiently, but also to run them in a way that really works for patients. So yes, as ever, it's a both and.
Thank you. And number 2, question there.
Thank you. I'm Kathy from West Yorkshire ICB. Thank you very much for sharing that Calderdale and Huddersfield example. I was there yesterday hearing about their great work. My question is about local authorities and their deficits now and their deficits going into next financial year. It has a direct consequence and a risk to providers working in neighbourhoods, places and across integrated care systems. And we had a discussion in our board meeting yesterday about being proactive about this, not reactive. And I wonder what your thoughts are, if we're truly health and care and working under a department for health and social care, how we should work together on that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think 2 things to say. One is, I think, just to go back to what Secretary of State said this morning, really welcome announcement on additional funding for social care. This morning, the 500 million, and that's going to be really important as we go forward. Through the Better Care Fund, obviously, there is already a big pot of money that comes as a shared resource, and it's absolutely right that we're going to have to make sure collectively that we are using that funding absolutely to best effect for what makes the biggest difference for the population. On the question about the sort of but there is this is my second part is, but there is a separation. So we are funded separately to local authorities. We have different governance. We need to work in partnership. But I think we just need to be clear about what it is that the NHS is distinctly responsible for delivering. So there are some things in the list that I gave out earlier that we cannot do unless we're working in partnership with social care, particularly discharge being most obvious, but it's not the only one. But there are some things on that list that we have to take responsibility for. And we just need to make sure, I think, in wanting to be good partners, we're also clear what the distinct responsibilities are that we carry and where the partnership approach is absolutely crucial.
Amanda, thank you so much for taking so many questions. I think we have run out of time, but I think we've covered a lot. Thank you for all the questions that got submitted on the sort of online system. Thank you again very much for your time. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.